Well, good afternoon for everyone who's able to make it and for those watching on the live stream at home. My name is Ethan Gray. I'm the managing editor for the TCC Connection. We welcome you to Tulsa Community College, the largest two-year community college in the state. I also welcome you to today's Newsmakers Day, featuring Oklahoma's Attorney General Gentner Drummond. Today's program is an opportunity to hear and learn firsthand from the state's top law enforcement official. Today's program has been produced by the staff of the TCC Connection in partnership with the Society of Professional Journalists Pro and Student Chapters and our partners at the college. President Lee Goodson, Dean Anina Collier, and Sydney Barton of the Center for Creativity, Dr. Eunice Tarver and Keeter Dotson and the Office of Student Success, Dean Kelly Clark and the Visual and Performing Arts Department, and Dr. Beverly Bailey, Adjunct Professor Kim McCullough, and Dr. Jerry Goodwin and the Mass Communication Department. Also, I want to thank newspaper staff members Sam Lervault and Tanya Nyborg for their support and participation in producing today's program. At this time, I'd like to introduce Dr. Lee Goodson, President of Tulsa Community College, for welcome remarks.
I am very excited to be here today and hear the great questions that are going to come from our students. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this special meet and greet event. We're honored to have Attorney General Gentner Drummond joining us today, and we'll hear about his priorities, and we will engage in discussions about the future of Oklahoma. I want to thank our sponsors today, the TCC Connection, Society of Professional Journalists, Student Chapters, Oklahoma Society of Professional Journalists, the professional chapter, Visual and Performing Arts Department, and the Mass Communication Division. We're the largest community college in Oklahoma here in Tulsa, at Tulsa Community College, and we provide opportunities for students in Tulsa and all across Oklahoma. We help students build careers and support our local businesses with a skilled workforce. TCC plays a critical role in shaping the future of our workforce and expanding access to higher education. We are thrilled to host this event, and we're really excited to hear from you today, General Drummond, and we know that you are such an incredible advocate for students. Thank you for being here. And yeah.
No, thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Goodson. We appreciate the continuing support from your office and from the administration. Before I introduce Samara Sfaha, I would like to introduce our journalism panelists. Can each journalist stand when his or her name is called? The student journalists who will be asking questions today are Camila Abdisadarova, Chris Melisinos, and Sierra Ross. Next, I would like to introduce Samara Sfaha, editor of the TCC Connection, who will serve as moderator for today's program.
My name is Samara Sfaha. I'm the editor at the TCC Connection. We thank the audience for joining us in the process of informing our student body of the important issues of the day in that area of concerning them. The more informed the electorate is, then the greater the outcomes of this American experience. Again, thank you for joining us today. I'd like to thank Attorney General Gentner Drummond for taking time out of his busy schedule to interact and engage with the students at Tulsa Community College. Please join me in welcoming Attorney General Drummond. I'll be reading Attorney General Drummond's bio. Attorney General Gentner Drummond is the 20th Attorney General of Oklahoma. He has nearly 30 years of legal experience in serving as the Assistant District Attorney in Pawnee and Osage counties, and as the founding member of his Tulsa-based law firm, Drummond Law. A seventh-generation Oklahoman, he's also a rancher, banker, and a businessman. A decorated U.S. Air Force jet pilot, Drummond led the first combat mission to the Persian Gulf War, Mr. Drummond is among the most decorated Oklahomans to serve in that conflict, earning the Distinguishing Flying Cross of Extraordinary Achievement, 3 aerial medals, and 4 aerial achievement medals. Since taking office in January 9, 2023, he has focused on fighting crime, combating corruption, ensuring government transparency, and improving tribal relations. He launched Oklahoma's first organized crime task force to clamp down the state's epidemic of illegal marijuana operations and associated crime activities such as human trafficking, illegal immigration, and opioid distribution. Under Attorney General Drummond's leadership, his office has always been successful in securing legislation on illegal activities, strengthening prosecution of rape criminals, and bringing to justice those involved in child pornography and fentanyl distribution. Additionally, Mr. Drummond has worked on toughening laws on violent crimes and illegal immigration and has fought federal overreach. He also has been a stunt advocate for Oklahoma's energy industry, pushing for less federal overregulation. Attorney General Drummond received his law degree from Georgetown University and his undergraduate degree from Oklahoma State University. He and his wife, Wendy, of 15 years, have a blended family of 6 children and 7 grandchildren. Thank you, Attorney General, for joining us today. I will let you now give us your remarks.
Great, thank you. Am I on? Okay, I think I'm on. So I'm very honored to be here, and I enjoy this opportunity to have dialogue with all of our up-and-coming leaders across the state. I'd like to just touch on make a few remarks, and then we'll open it up to our panelists to ask questions. You know, as the audience participates today, I hope that what you'll take away is the significance and importance of elections. I encourage every young person to be a registered voter and to participate in this process because elections have consequences. In my instance, I was inspired by my grandfather, frankly, as a 14-year-old. He sat me down, and I'm the oldest of a very large extended family, 65 in my generation, and he said, you know, I encourage you to serve in the military, but only for a short while. Come back, raise your family, engage in commerce, and then when they're grown and out of college, then come back and serve the state. And that's the path of my life, and that's what I've done. And when I ran for office, I ran on 4 major issues, and I'm sure we're going to tease those out today. But one was tribal relations. Second was abating the criminal element associated with the medical marijuana industry. Third was transparency and openness in government. And the last one was trying to root out fraud, waste, and abuse at a state level that was rampant as I viewed our state. I've counted down my tenure in weeks as I began, and now that I'm over halfway through, I just count it down in months. But it's important to make every day count as an elected official, and that's exactly what I do. So with that, I look forward to engaging our panelists with questions and show a little authenticity and openness. So, panelists.
Thank you. I will actually be asking the first 2 questions, and then I'll turn over the floor to my colleagues. The questions were gathered from the student body who submitted it to us. We then grouped the questions into categories to ask today. My first question to you would be, what do you consider the most significant threat facing Oklahomans today from your perspective as Attorney General, and what do you believe are the most important issues of this generation of young adults in academia or not?
Thank you. So I would tell you this. When I took the oath of office in January of 23, we had over 12,000 marijuana grow facilities in the state of Oklahoma. Based on the number of registered medical marijuana users, we needed 5. So 12,000 presents a situation where we had an abundance of marijuana being produced, and it needed to find a market. And what happened, and I think it was intentional, by syndicated organizations from mainland China and cartels from principally Mexico, but other southern nations, was a distribution system that created a lot of adverse effect on Oklahoma. Not just the movement of marijuana out of the state into New York and New Jersey and other states, but also the distribution of fentanyl and human trafficking and sex trafficking. And that's what we've discovered, and that's what I've invested a significant amount of my effort in abating that. As of the end of February, we were down to 2,650 marijuana grow facilities. So we've rooted out over 9,000, and with that, a lot of organized crime.
Great. And what do you believe is the most important issue for this generation of young adults in academia or not?
So I think the most important thing for this generation is engagement. The baby boomer generation is aging out and dying off, and you are the next generation. You're the generation that will carry this nation forward. And so that requires engagement on many levels. Obviously, you're engaged intellectually because you're a student enrolled at TCC, which is a remarkable organization, but you need to become workforce ready and then engage in our community. And that involves civic engagement. And we need, you are disproportionately represented at the ballot box. Politicians can ignore people under 28. Absolutely ignore you. And for you to change that, to pivot that, you need to be engaged because, a typical politician will not be here speaking to you because there's not votes to be gathered. I'm here because I believe in the civic discourse of intellectual exchange of ideas and authenticity and transparency. But for you, I think the exigent threat to our nation is the lack of engagement by our young people, and that's the primary driver for me being here today.
Thank you. My second question to you would be, how do you believe your service to our country in the Air Force prepared you for your role in the government?
So as a military officer, I whether I liked it or not, I was forced into a very structured regime where skills, it's a merit-based, our military is merit-based for the most part. Those are excellent. For example, in my experience in the Gulf War, those who are our very best flew missions into Iraq and engaged in the war fighting. Those that were not as qualified were more defensive air, and they stayed on the Saudi Arabian side. That's very reflective of the military structure, that those with the most capacity are stressed and exploited the most. And consequently, I took those skills and lessons learned, organizational management and the like, into my businesses. When I took office, I had 900 employees outside of in my private companies, and now as the Attorney General, have 317 souls. And the Attorney General's office is structured as a military unit, where I have divisions that answer up to me and subdivisions that answer up to those division leaders. And it's a very efficient, perhaps some would say too efficient, way of doing business. But we're giving you a 100% return on your investment in our tax dollars.
Thank you. At this time, Mr. Drummond, I will turn the floor over to my colleagues for their questioning. Camilla?
The following questions were formulated by students and faculty at Tulsa Community College and have been condensed into the following questions. The questions will cover the following topics: education, drug enforcement, public health, environmental, federal and state law, tribal relations, and transparency. Our first set of questions is related to education. Mr. Drummond, under Superintendent Ryan Walters' administration, we have seen mismanagement of public education funds and violations of transparency laws, contributing to a decline in our state's education system. What specific legal actions or reforms do you believe are necessary to address these issues and improve accountability within the Department of Education?
As I mentioned earlier, elections have consequences. So we as a state elected Mr. Walters as our superintendent of public education. I think now, retrospectively, we look at him, and he was a delightful, engaging high school history teacher, but he was probably not equipped to manage such a large department. Our governor picked him out of McAllister, made him secretary of, first made him the overseer of our gear dollars because he was in a political battle with the then superintendent of public education, Joy Hoffmeister. Of the $30 million that we received in the governor's emergency educational relief fund, he deployed $12 million through the superintendent of public education, Joy Hoffmeister, which was perfectly administered. $18 million he gave to Every Kid Counts, and Mr. Walters was the CEO. We now know through research and investigation that those $18 million were misapplied. To the extent they were applied compliant with the rules, it was only by coincidence. By and large, they were misapplied. Now, in Oklahoma, that's not a crime to misapply funds. I believe that we are exposed to the federal government. If they audited us, that we would probably have to repay of the $18 million he distributed, about $14 to $16 million. But that's not happened. My office did investigate the deployment of those funds and found that no crime was committed, no self-dealing. He did not enrich himself, but we issued a multi-county grand jury report that illustrated the gross mismanagement of those funds, for which the intent is lessons learned. Don't do that again. As it relates to the measurables, we simply are failing our young people. And I think it's an accumulation of many factors. But when we have elected officials that are driven by social media clicks and not by performance in whatever role they have, then we're probably set up to fail. And I think that's the instance that we have here.
Thank you.
Well, I just want to say first how impressive your bio is. Just listening to it really inspires every young person in Tulsa and the whole world, I would guess. So I wanted to ask more about what can be changed. So you have urged the board members to use reasonable skepticism in future education policies. What specific policies from Walter's tenure do you believe should be overturned or reconsidered?
Right. So it's a great question regarding board oversight. So we know that no member of the State Board of Education voted against anything that was put up for vote until just recently. That's probably an indication that either the education department is remarkably efficient and well-run, or we have board members that are not holding accountable public officials. I found it interesting that the governor, who's now been our governor for 6.5 years, realizes that under his watch, education is plummeted. Our educational outcomes for our secondary education is plummeted. And I think that he appropriately fired board members that were not holding accountable the superintendent of public education and repopulated it with men and women that will do that. Time will tell. We have another 22 months to see how that works out, 21 months to see how that works out. But I do think that, and I'm sorry, I'm going to have to just step back on a little government 101. We have the executive branch in Oklahoma that is not the equivalent of the federal government. The federal government has a unitary executive branch, meaning the president. And the president, everyone answers up to the president on the executive side. In Oklahoma, at statehood, we didn't trust elected officials. We didn't trust concentration of power. So we are a non-unified executive branch where we have independently elected auditor, who holds accountable people, attorney general, who enforces the law, insurance commissioner, who oversees the insurance industry, labor commissioner, who oversees labor, 3 corporation commissioners, and a treasurer, and a superintendent of public education. So we have non-unified. So these executives, such as Mr. Walters, who has constitutional rights, but they only go so far as the executive branch can do. And stated otherwise, the power of the people is the power of the state. And the people transfer that power to the legislature. And the legislature is the body that makes rules, makes laws. and it's the executive branch that implements those. So what we've seen is many occasions where the State Board of Education has created rules that are exclusive jurisdiction of the legislature. And you've seen me come in with Attorney General's opinions that have said that those are invalid and they cannot be acted upon, which has been somewhat of a savior to many of our high schools and middle schools and elementary schools. So that's the consequence of this bifurcation and the need for members of our boards throughout the state. The governor has 580 appointees to boards across the state. And it's so important that we populate those boards with men and women that are committed to the rule of law. Thank you.
Thank you.
As you stated, in a letter to the new board members replaced by Governor Kevin Stitt, you stated that the board members should act independently of Governor Stitt and Superintendent Walters. Given the political nature of the appointment process, how can Oklahomans trust that the new board members will not just serve a different political agenda? And after hearing your answer, would you suggest a more unified?
So it's a great question. So, if you're going to serve, you have to be willing to do the right thing. And that letter, the objective of that letter was to encourage these board members to act in the best interest of the educational system. So that if the governor were so inclined to say, hey, board member A, I need you to drive this agenda and vote this way, I was encouraging the board members to act independently. Once appointed, the governor doesn't get to vote for them. They get to vote for themselves. Now, we see and we know that governors have the power to fire board members. But if our board members and our appointed officials throughout the state, and frankly our elected officials, are willing to put themselves in harm's way to do the right thing, then ultimately the wave of transparency and accountability will overcome those that have political agendas that are contrary to the basic essentials of, for instance, the education department. So the letter's objective was to give them just a little shot in the arm, be strong, do the right thing, even if it costs you your appointment.
And to follow up, as you mentioned, according to Oklahoma Watch and other independent sources, the state of Oklahoma is ranked 49th worst state in education. Do you think that closing the federal Department of Education is going to improve educational outcomes in Oklahoma, and where will public schools get their funding from if it passes?
So we were able to function as a nation without a Department of Education until President Carter formed the Department of Education. So that was in the 1970s. So the 1960s, somehow, federal dollars made it to Oklahoma, the 50s, 40s, 30s, 20s. So we know that the federal government, and to be quite frank, the Department of Education at the federal level is a pass-through entity. Now, a lot of wonderful men and women that are committed to educational outcomes and research and make recommendations at the federal Department of Education. But let's be candid. The lowest level, the level at which the people touch is our school boards throughout the independent school districts of Oklahoma. So the school boards of Oklahoma make decisions for their independent school districts, and the state school board makes basically decisions on the curriculum and the standards. The federal government, we Oklahomans pay taxes to the federal government. The federal government deploys those taxes for many things: military and education, interstate commerce, international commerce. But some of those tax dollars rightly come back to the state for educational purposes. So long as the federal government figures out how to deploy those dollars back to the state of Oklahoma, we'll be okay. If they fail to deploy those dollars, it will create cacophony and irreparable injury to our young people. So I'm optimistic. prayerful that there is actually a plan. I don't see the plan, but I'm hopeful that there is. It appears that there's an intent to defund and depopulate the Department of Education. But so long as a responsible federal agency picks up the transfer of dollars from the federal government to the state government, and so long as we get those dollars, I'm confident that the state can appropriately deploy them.
Our second set of questions are related to drug enforcement and cold case grant. Since the enactment of House Bill 2095 and the establishment of the Organized Crime Task Force in collaboration with the Oklahoma Bureau of Narcotics and Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigations, have you seen a decrease in illegal marijuana farms or businesses in Oklahoma?
Yes. So as I was running for office, I saw this proliferation of marijuana grow facilities. And anecdotally, I believe many of them to be illegally gotten. So shortly after taking office, I asked the legislature to please fund and permit me to stand up an organized crime task force, which they did, and I did. And as a consequence of that task force, and just to break it down, they are two very sophisticated teams of federal, and former federal and former state and former county and city law enforcement personnel that are best in class, along with analysts and along with highly skilled agents. And those teams are tasked with investigating and prosecuting illegal grow facilities across the state, in concert with the many state actors, as you mentioned, but also county actors. Our county sheriff's departments are partners in these task force actions, and our city police forces are our partners, but also Homeland Security, Secret Service, and many of the other federal agencies. So the task force is just that. We, under my oversight, deploy and bring in partners, U.S. Marshals Force, for example, and identify illegal grows and shut them down. And it's been very effective. As I mentioned, we have now 9,000 fewer marijuana grow facilities in the state. Many were closed because of economic reasons. Many were closed because they were illegal and knew they would be caught, and many were closed because they were caught. And we're presently, just to expand on the answer, we have 78 actions presently pending throughout the many counties of the state in which we're taking back the real estate that was illegally owned by illegal aliens that were engaged in illegal activity. So we've really been impactful. I'm hopeful over the next 21 months that we can continue to drive out the illegal actor such that when I'm no longer your Attorney General, we just have the legal people doing the right thing.
Thank you.
This question is about the funding your office has been getting. So your office has been awarded 4 federal grants totaling more than $2 million to create a cold case unit, increase equipment in its digital forensic unit, and add 3 lethality assessments, protocol training coordinators to the victim services unit. How will the cold case investigation be prioritized?
So to begin from a broader perspective and go down to the narrow, under the Attorney General's direction, we have a robust victim services division. And those victim services provide many resources to victims of crime and the surviving victims of those who were otherwise murdered. Inside of that, we also oversee the Domestic Violence Fatality Review Board, where we dive deeper, not just into the how, the numbers, the empirical numbers of how many people have been injured, but also in what can we do to change those outcomes. And then inside that same division is the cold case unit, where the federal government has awarded $2 million to my office. We have this confluence in Oklahoma of principally Native Americans who were here somewhere within the United States before settlers, a European influence, and and then an African-American influence through the slave trades of the 17th and 18th century. Here in Oklahoma, we are unique among other states in that we're a southern state with a large African-American population, a large European descent population, and then the Native Americans. We as a state failed the Native Americans in the 1920s and before, where people of color were just not treated the equivalent of European descendants. And consequently, that wave continued throughout the 40s, 50s, and 60s, where we have many, from a population perspective, the missing and murdered indigenous people are high. And that plays into this cold case, and that's really been the focus so far of the cold case unit, and that is we have many families in the state of Oklahoma who have family members who are murdered, and we've never found their perpetrator. And I think it's a matter of discriminatory choice early on that I want to change that direction such that every life matters. And if there is someone who has been murdered and we have not identified the perpetrator or isolated it to suicide, then I want to investigate those. And we have a disproportionate number in Oklahoma of Native American women. If you're a Native American woman in the state of Oklahoma, the likelihood of you dying from your partner and or your crime going unsolved is higher than anywhere else in the United States. And that's got to be changed. And that's why I'm a proponent of the cold case unit, because we are going to tackle these cases, not guaranteeing success, but guaranteeing effort and best efforts at that. Thank you.
And a follow-up question, what steps will be taken to ensure transparency to Oklahoma citizens affected by the cold cases?
So it is, we have highly skilled and talented agents and analysts that are following leads and engaging community members in this. Anytime you have a crime that's happened 15, 20, 30 years ago, the tangible evidence has disappeared more likely than not, although there is some tangible evidence in police evidence rooms. But the witnesses, and it's a heavy lift, but we're committed to that with community engagement. And frankly, when I speak to Native American groups, inevitably, when I've stepped off the dais and I'm mixing, I will have 2 or 3 leads given to me almost virtually every time I speak, because the need is so great for Oklahoma.
Our next questions we will be asking are about public health and well-being. With domestic violence affecting 49.1% of women and 40.7% of men in Oklahoma, these numbers suggest a systemic failure in prevention and intervention efforts. Given the persistent severity of these issues, do you believe current policies are effective, or do they require a fundamental overhaul? And what legislative or enforcement changes do you propose to ensure meaningful progress rather than incremental adjustments?
Great question. So when I was addressing Chris's last question, I talked about the Victim Services Unit, and inside of that, a large part of that is dedicated to domestic violence. I'm one of the founders of the Family Safety Center here in Tulsa. I was raised in an abusive household, so I don't speak of that liberally, but it's just the reality. My siblings and I suffered, and my mother suffered from a violent offender. And so I'm sympathetic to that need. So it's become a priority for my office, and I think that we've stood up a remarkable network of men and women that are absolutely devoted to changing this. So, for example, here in Tulsa, when Family Safety Center was originally an offshoot of domestic violence, DIVIS, we had very few, a lot of people the first year, 1,000, principally women seeking services. The next year, it doubled. The next year, it tripled. And now we're serving 23,000 people on a yearly basis in Tulsa County. So in one regard, you think, oh my goodness, we're becoming more violent. But what in reality it is we're becoming more victim forward. So victims now have an opportunity and an outlet to seek services and assistance and protection. Our emergency protective order docket is very robust in Tulsa and Oklahoma counties for women that are seeking protection from their partners. So that is a huge effort in, one, awareness, two, giving a voice to the victim, and three, providing the services that were nascent a decade ago, and now they're more robust. The Domestic Violence Fatality Review Board is another one that, as we dive deeper and get the message out to more and more people, we learn more and more data. And that review board looks at the incidents of violence in our households and makes recommendations to the legislature that I champion on an annual basis. And we are, in fact, the most violent state proportionally in the nation. And if you're a woman, the likelihood of you being murdered by your spouse, your partner, domestic partner, is the highest in the nation. So we have to make changes, systemic changes, not facial changes, systemic changes in how we train and educate and provide services. It's exigent.
Thank you.
The Emergency Price Stabilization Act prohibits an increase of more than 10% in the price of goods and services for several counties that recently suffered from fires. What is the mechanism of law, and will large corporations obey the law?
So the price stabilization, once the governor declares an emergency, then that law kicks in. And so people cannot arbitrarily increase their prices more than 10%. Now we know supply and demand has a play in that. And so, for example, we've had the fires recently, and it coincided with spring break. Spring break is a holiday, and hotels typically raise their prices during holidays. So there was some confusion on the violation of that Control Act, Price Control Act. But what it is intended to do is to prevent, frankly, the out-of-state roofing companies coming in from Arkansas, Kansas, and Texas, and taking advantage of people that have lost their roofs for hail, tornadoes, and the like. But it's a mechanism through which the people can report these violations to my office. If you notice, and I hope you haven't had to notice, but anytime there's a natural disaster in the state of Oklahoma, agents from the Attorney General's office deploy and put up placards and signs all around the neighborhoods that identify that we're here to help. And there's a 800 number for them to call. And if people call and believe that they've been taken advantage of in any capacity, in a consumer capacity, we investigate and prosecute. And we frequently are prosecuting. As a matter of fact, we have 35 active prosecutions against individuals that exploited consumers in a similar fashion that this law is designed. So we can't catch them all, but we're here to protect. And sometimes the offender is unaware of the law and will return the funds and be under a probationary period. But so oftentimes they're intentional and they know exactly what they're doing. And we prosecute those successfully and put them in prison.
Thank you.
Our next question will be about environmental concerns. Mr. Drummond, you have said Oklahoma taxpayers' hard-earned dollars shouldn't be wasted on the so-called green energy agenda. Thanks to President Trump and EPA Administrator Lee Zeldin for taking action to put an end to this misuse of funds. According to the Environmental Protection Network, the EPA found that greenhouse gases pose a threat to public health, while also violating compliances of the Clean Air Act. Respectfully, can you help us understand how this is a misuse of funds, and if you have a plan from the Office of the Attorney General to protect our air, land, and water for the future generations in a sustainable manner?
That's a very fair question. If I can break it down. One, when I took office, we had a poultry litigation lawsuit that had been basically the trial had ended 14 years ago, and we were waiting on the federal judge to rule. And I provoked and prompted that federal judge to rule. And so we anticipate, and it's been a long slog, we've refreshed the record with a 7-day bench trial finishing just last November. And I anticipate that a ruling will come down that will help Oklahoma through injunctive relief to the poultry companies of Arkansas to not pollute our waters. So I'm an advocate for clean water, clean air, and clean environment. My comments vis-a-vis the green energy is this. The principal industry in the state of Oklahoma is oil and gas. There's no subsidy afforded oil and gas operators in the state of Oklahoma. You and I know that ultimately we will run out of oil and gas. It will not be in your lifetimes, but ultimately we will. Maybe 75 years, maybe 100 years. And we need alternative sources when that day comes. We can all be in agreement on that. And a lot of those alternatives should be cleaner than the burning. We've already evolved from burning coal to burning oil to burning natural gas, which is a very clean source of energy. The complaint that I have is our wind energy is subsidized in an amazing fashion, such that if there were not the subsidies to the wind energy, they would not build windmills. And the carbon footprint associated with the construction of a windmill greatly outstrips the green value of that energy produced. So we are not yet there in the evolution of science and in technology and invention to be able to provide a green alternative. Perhaps hydrogen is that alternative, because we have water in abundance, and we can convert that into hydrogen, and we can deploy that. We have solar in abundance, but the solar panels themselves are very expensive and very anti-green to construct. And then we have a nuclear option, which literally is a nuclear option, and that's to build a nuclear plant. Those have a shelf life, but they're very unpopular. Nobody wants one in their backyard. But we now have scientific evolution of nuclear plants such that they are no longer generated through heat, but generated in a non-heat combustible sense. And they're evolutionary in Europe, and they're finding their way into the United States. So we have many alternatives to coal today that we need to continue to elaborate on, to develop, but to do it disingenuously, to say we're actually producing less adverse effects on the environment is not a fair statement. And that was the basis of that comment.
Thank you.
And to be respectful of time, we're going to have the panelists ask one question from each of the last 3 categories before we begin wrapping up. Thank you.
All right. Mine is over federal and state law. So, Mr. Drummond, how are you ensuring that the state laws are upheld though they may conflict with federal laws? For instance, how have you dealt with the McGirt ruling?
So the McGirt ruling, for those who are not aware, in 2018, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that the state of Oklahoma does not have the right to prosecute Native Americans who've committed major crimes. Major crimes are generally the big felonies, murder, rape, and kidnapping and the like. So McGirt created a disconnect between state enforcement of criminal justice, tribal enforcement, and federal enforcement. And it exacerbated on the eastern side of Oklahoma, including Tulsa County. So the tribes have the right and have tribal prosecutors, tribal courts, but they are capped by the federal government at 3 years sentence. So a tribe can prosecute a murderer, but they can only sentence him to 3 years in prison. So that's a disconnect. In Oklahoma, you can sentence a murderer to life without the opportunity for parole. Similarly, the federal government can do the same thing. So the McGirt decision did create a disconnect between the tribes, the federal government, the state government, for which I've invested literally hours every week since I've been elected to work toward intergovernmental agreements with the tribes and the state such that the state can provide the resources to the tribe such that the tribes can exercise sovereignty in partnership with the state. And I think that's a path that will be followed throughout my tenure, and then if I'm elected governor, certainly through intergovernmental compacts where we reinstate the cooperation between state and tribe specifically on that issue.
Our next question is on the subject of tribal relations. Considering your 30 years, including your role as Assistant District Attorney in Pawnee and Osage counties, how has your relationship with various stakeholders evolved over the past few years in your role of Attorney General?
We have 38 federally recognized tribes in the state of Oklahoma, and I will tell you that makes us unique among all states. We have a governor presently who believes that if a tribal government wins, the state government loses. The state government loses. It's a zero-sum game. I'm not that kind of a leader. I'm a leader that believes that if the tribal governments are successful, Oklahoma is successful. And otherwise, we want, you guys are too young, but in the 1980s, we had many publicly traded companies, Fortune 100 companies, that left Oklahoma. Halliburton, Amaretta Hess, and the like. ConocoPhillips have basically consolidated and then moved to Houston. So we've lost thousands of jobs and hundreds of millions of dollars in economic opportunity. We have 3 tribes in the state of Oklahoma that if they were corporations would be Fortune 100 companies. The Chickasaws, Choctaws, and Cherokees. Each make over $4 billion a year. So these are economic powerhouses that the state of Oklahoma should partner with and not fight with. That is the economic conversation. There's also the social conversation. We have 38 sovereign nations inside the geographic borders of Oklahoma, each of whom are unique. And they bring with them that cultural diversity that makes Oklahoma rich. And I see a future governor reaching out a hand of prosperity, a hand of partnership that works with the tribes, that elevates the economic opportunities of every Oklahoman.
This question is about transparency. You recently praised the passage of House Bill 2164 for its role in promoting transparency and accountability in state purchasing. How does this bill align with your broader goal of increasing transparency and preventing public corruption in Oklahoma?
So if we do things in the open, the likelihood of us doing it right and best is high. If, however, I can manipulate the system or get my way without you seeing me get my way, then the likelihood, the temptation to do the wrong thing is high. So I've been a proponent for transparency in state government. Before I took office, if you needed records from the State Department of Education, they could easily just not respond. I now get a report every Friday at noon from the State Department of Education on how many open records they were requested and how many they responded to, and it's a running list. And that's helping the superintendent. I've helped evolve him into that. I have presently a bill pending that would give my office, I've formed an officer in my agency whose sole purpose is to assist citizens of the state of Oklahoma to retrieve documents and information from state, county, and city officials. And I'm hopeful that there's a law that's pending that I hope the governor won't veto that would give me standing to sue entities that do not produce the records. Right now, you can sue, but that means you have to go hire an attorney and go to court and spend money to get records that were otherwise should have been given to you. And I'm suggesting that I should do that for you. And we have a whole division that we're happy to stand up that enforces transparency, that requires people to do things in open, that we have true requests for proposals, RFPs. We have true bidding consistent with the law so that we can no longer manipulate it as we have in years past. Thank you.
Thank you.
This concludes our question and answer session with Attorney General Gentner Drummond. Mr. Drummond would like to provide you with the opportunity of having your closing remarks.
So on April 30, there will be an oral argument at the United States Supreme Court. And it affects everybody in this room. So we, as a state, have a statewide charter school board, and it granted an applicant a charter to have a parochial school. And it just so happens it's Catholic. It could be it could be Wiccan or Muslim, Jewish, it could be anything, but in this instance it's Catholic. So we, the state, have entered into a contract with a private entity to form a public entity called St. Isidore Public Charter School. It is effectively funding religious indoctrination. I believe that that was a violation of our Constitution, and I sued. Our Oklahoma Supreme Court ruled 7-2 in my favor, and the applicant has petitioned the Supreme Court for a hearing. The United States Supreme Court has granted that hearing. So I encourage you to follow the media and the results of that April 30 oral argument, which will be published in about June, on whether or not the Establishment Clause of the United States Constitution continues to be the Establishment Clause, through which we are free to worship or not worship our God as we so choose without state interference. So I'm fighting this at great peril as a Republican in a world that does not see the distinction. And I encourage you to pay attention to that. It will be probably the most impactful Supreme Court determination since the determination on abortion, and probably one of the most impactful in educational circles for your lifetime. So pay attention. I will leave you with this thought. We need elected officials and appointed officials that will do the right thing, regardless of the consequences. And as that young fighter pilot, I will tell you briefly a story. I was chosen to lead the first strike mission in the Gulf War. There were 4 simultaneous strike missions. I was one of the 4. And as we crossed the border with fighter bombers in tow, we were met with a barrage of anti-aircraft artillery, surface-to-air missiles, engaged MiG-29s, pushed them out, took our fight to the southwest corner of Baghdad, delivered their bombs, and as we exited and were close to Saudi Arabia, I was ordered to go back north to kill. And as I wheeled around and I found the jet, I called out its heading and its altitude and the like, and the AWACS controller said, "That's your bandit, you're clear to kill." So for a fighter pilot, that's simple. Now I just run the intercept, put the dot in the circle, push the button at 45 miles. At 25 miles, he blows up, I'm over. But as I ran that intercept, I concluded that he was not a bad actor. I concluded that he must have been from my strike package, went further deep into Baghdad, realized it, turned around, and now separated by 100 miles. So I elected to disobey the direct order to kill. I ran the intercept. I was right. They were wrong. It was a Saudi Tornado pilot who I escorted back to the same airbase. As we landed, he gave a formal bow and went east. I went west. When I pulled into my chocks, I was arrested for disobeying this order. Meanwhile, he told his commander, who told his commander, came across to the U.S. side, and I was met by a general officer who said, "Take off his handcuffs, give him a Distinguished Flying Cross." He didn't kill a Saudi prince. Now, I share that story to say this. The makeup of that 27-year-old fighter pilot is the same skills that you've been taught by your professors here, by your high school and middle school teachers, by your faith leaders, by your parents, and that is simply this: we do the right thing. That night, I did the right thing. I put myself in harm's way. As your Attorney General, I make hard decisions that are not politically popular, but they are the right thing, consistent with the rule of law. And I anticipate that someday, 21 months from now, when I take a new oath of office as governor of the state of Oklahoma, you can rest assured that the governor will make the right decision every time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Drummond. And to end on just one final note, one final question, that is, what commitment can you make to the young people of Oklahoma to ensure that their voices are part of the government decisions and actions?
So, as I mentioned, it requires civic engagement, and I will be one who populates my cabinet with men and women that have different backgrounds, that are best in their arena, and that they see things differently than I. I consider myself a very aware and learned individual, but I will tell you, as hard as I want to see things, I see things through the eyes of a middle-aged white man. My wife informs me that frequently, that I don't see things correctly, and she informs me and helps me be aware of that I don't see, because I just don't understand it. And so I have populated my key cabinet around me as Attorney General with men and women that don't necessarily see things as I see them, but will hold me accountable. And if I am successful and elected governor, what you'll see in my cabinet are men and women that are best in their areas that will hold me accountable. And I encourage, and I don't discriminate among youth or agedness. So Professor Goodwin, he would be excellent in that cabinet, but so would so many of you right here in this room. So I encourage you to be engaged in your state and local government and serve, give back, and make an impact.
Thank you so much. And let's give another round of applause for Mr. Drummond for joining us today. Secondly, I want to thank each and every one of you for participating in one of the most important aspects of our democracy. We hope that today's program has helped you to be more informed on issues involving the Office of Attorney General. Mr. Drummond, on behalf of the student body, we'd like to give you this gift.
There you go.
Today's program has been produced by the staff of the TCC Connection in partnership with the Society of Professional Journalists Pro and Student Chapters and our partners at the college, President Lee Goodson, Dean Anina Collier, and Sydney Barton of the Center for Creativity, Dr. Eunice Tarver and Keterin Dotson in the Office of Student Success, Dean Kelly Clark in the Visual and Performing Arts Department, and Dr. Beverly Bailey, Adjunct Professor Kim McCullough, and Dr. Jerry Goodwin in the Mass Communication Department. This ends today's program. Thank you all for joining us, and have a great rest of your afternoon. And if any TCC faculty and staff would like to come get a picture, just go near the stage and we'll take a few photos.